Our approaches are very inclusive. It's not being academic or being really, really smart. It's only a part of, we need to know that somebody's not going to struggle, but it's not you must be the top elite STEM student in X. So I think all feelings of imposter syndrome, go away. And having been a young woman in STEM myself, I wouldn't have really felt confident enough in year 11 to go for something if I hadn't known it's friendly and fun and, a real chance just to have a great experience above all. So I think that's our magic with things like young women in STEM.
Welcome to the GovComms podcast, bringing you the latest insights and innovations from experts and thought leaders around the globe in government communication. Now, here is your host, David Pembroke.
Hello everyone and welcome once again to GovComms, a podcast about the practice of communication in government and the public sector. My name is David Pembroke. Thanks for joining me. As we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we are broadcasting from today, the Ngunnawal people, and pay my respects to all First Nations people from the lands where our listeners are joining us from today. We do again have another returning champion to the GovComms podcast, and it's Melanie Bagg. You may remember, but Melanie joined us for episode 53 of GovComms all the way back in 2020. Melanie is a PhD qualified medical research scientist and award-winning professional science communicator. She's currently the CEO of the National Youth Science Forum, where she's focused on delivering transformative youth-led experiences for young Australians to encourage lifelong participation in science, technology, engineering, and maths. She brings over 20 years of expertise in science communication, STEM management, fundraising, outreach, publishing, and the media for not-for-profits and in the higher education sector. Melanie, welcome back to GovComms.
Thank you for having me.
So, 6 years. What have you been up to?
A lot. But a lot of very exciting things. Obviously, it's not just me, but NYSF is an incredible team. But I think one of the things that is amazing is how much we've grown our impact and how many young people that we're reaching since we last spoke.
What's working? What's capturing young people's imagination around STEM?
Yeah, well, look, I think the essence of what we try to do at National Youth Science Forum is to connect young people with real STEM people and real STEM facilities and places where people actually do the STEM that's all around us. And that's something that you don't get to see in school. So I think that's what really excites them. You can be aware that you like a certain area because NYSF is all about an interest in and a passion for an area of science, technology, engineering, maths. But often that's very narrow when you're in school. You can see it as I'm a chemistry loving student or I'm a maths loving student. And when we take them out of the classroom and allow them to really explore what real workplaces are like and meet people at all different stages of the journey, they really get that chance to, start to think a bit more widely, think about the different pathways to something they might want to do, and fundamentally realising that there's a place for absolutely everyone in science and technology. And I think often there's a lot of misnomers out there about things like that you have to be really smart to be in science and technology, or you have to get the greatest marks, or sometimes people just can't see certain areas because they haven't had those subjects available to them at certain, like regional remote schools and things like that. So I just think that's what's really exciting, and to see those sparks, when people go, aha, I've realised that's something I can do, or indeed there's about 5 different ways I can reach the goal. That's what gets us all out of bed in the morning and really proud of what we can do with that.
It's interesting, isn't it, that, not to understate the importance of digital communication, but it sounds like the most powerful channel that you have for your communication is in real life, where people are actually, in person with each other.
For sure. And that was what was so challenging after we last spoke in 2020 is obviously we went into COVID. And so whilst it was a challenge for NYSF, because our flagship program, the NYSF Year 12 program, is a residential live-in program for 9 days. And that's really important because some of the people who most need to come and live in at a university campus are from regional remote areas or wouldn't otherwise just be able to pop in to a STEM facility or meet people who are doing science and tech. So the challenge there was COVID. We had to adapt. We had a big disruptor and we had to innovate. And I'm really pleased to say we did. And so there've been some huge learnings and expansions for what we do out of that. But what we did during that time was go to a hybrid approach, which was we bring people together from all over Australia. Usually that is residential, and that is the most incredible way to actually manage to do that in person. But what we did do was do state hubs, and we've actually kept them. So it's a mini version of what we do in the 9-day program, but it means that we can actually not only bring people in from all over Australia to explore science and technology, we can also make sure that they're getting to explore the real science facilities in either their own state or a state that they're really interested in going to, because each state has different strengths in terms of what science and tech they're really good at. So it's still, to me, most important to bring people together, and programs that we're currently running are all bringing people together, whether that's live-in or whether that's day programs like the smaller 3-day programs. But there is something to be said for having to think about it differently, innovate, and that's led to our new programs.
Yeah, good. So listen, tell me about your team and how it's structured and how you're thinking about telling the story of the NYSF.
Well, we're a small but mighty team, is how I like to say. So in terms of actual staff at the NYSF, it's 12, including myself. Which, when you think about the reach of how many young people we're helping every year, we're looking after and connecting somewhere around the 800 to 900 young people per year with science and technology across our different programs. And we also have a very vibrant volunteer program, which is all about making sure that everything we do is youth-led. And so for the young person attending any of our programs, it feels to them like there's somebody just that little bit further on in their career that is actually helping them. But behind the scenes, we train our volunteers really extensively. And obviously, because we work with so many people under the age of 18, there's a huge amount of child safety and governance that comes into that. In terms of volunteers, we also have amazing Rotary members all around Australia who do a whole range of things to support us. Some of them do volunteer to come in and just sort of provide that, first aid, CPR, those sort of, skills and helping on programs. But probably most importantly is finding those young people in regional and remote communities or, spreading the word in schools that may not otherwise think that their young people are going to get the chance to come to something like NYSF. And of course, our board, it's voluntary, and every single person on our board, they all have full-time jobs, them and also our patrons, but all of them give a huge amount of volunteer time to NYSF. So it's a real passion for all of us that are involved.
And then in terms of your actual team, that 12, and particularly those who are focused on the communication function, what does that look like? And how do you think about, a particular cadence and a particular approach that you might take, through the year? Obviously, the residential camps, when people are coming together, they're high intensity, high focus. But how do you think out your year from a communication and engagement point of view?
So our team, we sort of, it is one team, but there's two parts of it. So one part is very focused on program delivery and making sure that all that governance and child protection and all the huge amount of safe checking that we need to do, that is actually a key thing for that team. And that program delivery piece, they're also real masters at working with people across the STEM sector and with government around our science and tech priorities to actually make sure that our program is communicating exactly what is available in science and tech. So that is an important part of communication too. And then on the other side of my team, I have the external relations team, and we're more focused on making sure that we're getting the word out there and actually recruiting the folks who really need a program like National Youth Science Forum, which isn't easy with all the noise that's going on at the moment. It's quite a skill to be able to communicate with schools, the influences of young people, and make sure that young people put their hand up and have a go at engaging in these programs. And then the other side of that is we have a huge amount of partners who work with us to both deliver the programs, but also funding us. We don't have any actual core funding, so we've got key partners. And so it's very important for us to have that constant relationship with our partners. They also bring the STEM to what we do. So as in addition to looking at the national government priorities and making sure that everything we program is appropriate, it's often our partners who say, hey, we've got this opportunity. You can come and immerse these young people into this facility or this program. So, we're a small team and everybody has to roll up our sleeves and work together. In January, I'm on site staying in residential colleges just alongside everybody else and making sure, we look after everybody with this, huge volunteer workforce we have. But yeah, it's really communication's key, both in the team and also externally, whether that's to the young people we're recruiting and working with, the decision makers who need that STEM workforce, or our partners who really make sure we can do what we do.
So if we break that up in terms of, again, the communication function and looking inward to start with around internal communication, particularly with your volunteer, your staff base, your partners, what do you find works best for you, and what again does that look like in reality for you to support your business?
So internally, our Slack channels and that ability to very quickly get a message to each other or to the up to 100 volunteers that we're working with every year is really critical, even day to day. So just before hopping on here, I just reminded my team that I'll be having a chat with you today so that if they don't get an answer from me on something, they know what's going on. It's also a really great way to celebrate the wins and make sure that everybody feels valued. And in terms of our partners, I think the real key is making sure we have regular touch points. So whether that's going and having in-person catch-ups is ideal, but a number of our partners aren't based, where our office members are, and we're spread out as well. But particularly reporting back. So we evaluate everything we do. So we, for the Year 12 program, our flagship, we survey the students on the first day, the last day, a year later, and 5 years later. And so it's really critical for not only our partners, but the sector as a whole to be able to have a look at that data. And that helps all of us work better collaboratively to support young people.
That's fascinating. Tell me about that. And is there anything that you can draw from those particular, moments in time that you receive in terms of feedback? Is it atypical feedback that you're receiving most years, that first day is this, last day of the camp is that, 5 years is something else again? How does that come together?
Yeah, look, some of the standouts for me are it's that perception piece. So they often come to the National Youth Science Forum programs and have a very clear either interest or opinion of where they think they're going to go in terms of whether that's study, training or careers.
Okay.
By the end, we have to show that 65% of them have either changed their mind or expanded their options. And for some, it does confirm that it is what they wanted to do. But we see some really wild movement.
Wow.
For example, I can think of an amazing young woman who came wanting to be a doctor, a clinical, medical practitioner, and she is now a very highly qualified engineer and doing really critical work for the nation. So we see a lot of that. We see people who have really only been able to see the science and tech around them in their life. And look, I came from a country town, and I remember really I could only see, the nurses, the doctors, people who were doing, things that, around the river, and things like that. I didn't know what engineering was until second year uni. So that's a lot of what we do. And so on the first day, we do have a few of them grumble saying, you've only put me in X many chemistry visits, and I love chemistry. I want to just study chemistry. And we're like, the whole point of what we do at NYSF is to give you a taste and also to show how teams in real life work on STEM. So, that data scientist can have an amazing career in health because, that's actually something that is increasingly cyber AI, doing things more reliably, whether it's health, whether it's environment. And they just can't really see that perspective. So that is the big thing I do see. The other one is how life-changing it is and how they repeatedly say that, which is an amazing thing to see that in the comments, that it's sort of really taken the pressure off of a lot of them because they're about to start year 12. And they've sort of come into the program going, if I don't do everything absolutely perfectly and get a huge score for year 12, my life is over. And you do see that anxiety very much on that first couple of days. And then through this experience, that we're delivering through NYSF, they really realise that there's lots of ways to get to the end goal, and I think it makes them more relaxed, and then they probably do better than they would have anyway. And the other thing is they realise that science and tech people are real people, that we come in all different sizes, shapes, packages, ages, and that, everyone's got a place, in science and tech. And then the other thing that we repeatedly see is that they say they've found their tribe. And, we've now got 42 years worth of alumni. So 16,000 people have been through this program, and we've got data on what it meant to them. And so again, that meeting people their own age who like some sort of science and technology, they might be the only one at their school who does. And they feel valued, they feel seen, and they stay friends forever. At our 40th, we had a table that all got together from the very first NYSF, and some of them even travelled from overseas to come back and reunite with their buddies from NYSF.
So that management of the alumni, that's a very powerful cohort, 16,000. Mm-hmm. How do you think about managing that group? And organising that group in such a way that they can make a contribution, an ongoing contribution to the mission of the NYSF?
Yeah, so that has been a real focus for me so I've been in the role for nearly 7 years, and seeing, it's an incredible group of people, whether that's our most recent alumni, and we do these leadership programs for those, but then we've now got some of the most amazing leaders in science and tech in our country who are NYSF alum. So one example is Professor Tanya Munro, AC. She is actually the patron, the science patron of NYSF, and she went in 1990. And then another person who may be known to some of the folks in government is Tim Senden, and he went to the very first National Youth Science Forum. And the list goes on. There are so many of these amazing people. One of the communication challenges, of course, in the early days, because we started in 1984, was that no one had email. We had postal addresses. So one of the things that's been really important is nurturing that conversation both on LinkedIn and other social media platforms to make sure that people can connect with each other, and that we find the alumni that we might not have had emails for back then. What I do love is nearly any event I go to, any airport I'm in, you always meet someone who says, I did that program. And so it's a lovely feeling. The other thing that has been really important to me is in terms of looking at, how we make sure that there's a lot of things we can do for alumni. We are a not-for-profit charity and have very little resources. So anything we do, we have to really think about how we can do it and that it's having the best return on investment, both in terms of the time we're spending, but also any events we're running and things like that. So when I started, I introduced just shortly afterwards the 5-year survey. So we had done a 1-year survey. I sort of wanted to look at 5 years on, what are they doing? What do they need? And that's actually led to one of our new programs, the National Youth STEM Summit. And that's actually for people who have already finished school, but they're somewhere in that first very, very early part of their science and tech study training, or possibly their first grad role or traineeship. So they're earlier than they often are if they, for example, go on to further training or have actually started in, a department and have gotten that little bit further along. There's a lot to support people at that level. But what we saw from their data was that they felt vulnerable, and that was a time where, they've decided from school to go into science and tech. But, a lot of them are doing double degrees. A lot of them have STEM adjacent skills like communication, law, other things going on. So we could lose them to actually, being engaged in that science and tech pipeline. So when we looked at this data, we sort of went, okay, and I've got a great collaborative relationship with a lot of other professional membership organisations and also the learned academies. As when you last interviewed me, I'd come from the Academy of Science.
That's right.
I know there's a lot there for people who are maybe, age-wise probably around 26 to 30, and they're that little bit further on in STEM, but they're still considered early career. So they might be started a PhD or doing their masters. But what we're talking about and aiming for is working with those who might be second or third year of an undergraduate, or they've started, some vet training, and they're sort of asking themselves, well, what am I going to do after this? So the data really showed us that a lot of them knew what they could do either in the org where they were studying or training, or they knew vaguely what they could do in their states, but they didn't know what was available to help them and the network that they could have nationally. And the other thing, they didn't have the skills, those STEM adjacent skills like communications, networking, knowing how to use something like LinkedIn in the most fruitful way. So we really looked at that and talked to all of those other stakeholders. And so we've created this National Youth STEM Summit. It's in its fourth year, and it will be held in Canberra this year in September. And that allows them to come in for 3 days from anywhere in Australia in that very early piece and be connected with whether it's professional membership orgs like Science Technology Australia, Engineers Australia, or whether it's all those other further on programs like the Learned Academies, like AXI, Academy of Science, Health and Medical Science Academy. They all run these things, but at the moment when they're really early in their career, they don't have that. So it was our alumni that gave us that idea and why we created that particular program, but it's open to everybody because there is no point in every organisation having their own version. We like to make sure that what NYSF's offering is collaborative, inclusive, and actually filling a need. So we're really excited that that's, come out of that. And so being able to focus on one event once a year has actually meant that we can deliver for our alumni, but also people who have come out of other programs, such as the Olympiad programs, where they're, it's all about being really competitive and the very best in a certain area of STEM. Well, they're all welcome. Everyone's welcome at this. And often they learn about, we'll ask them, questions like, did you know you can get a policy job or a grad position in government after the summit? They don't know that yet. And they're already often 4 or 5 years into their studies. So that's probably been the most exciting thing. I mean, I would love to run state events one day and do things like that, but I guess we have to walk before we can run.
How many people get the opportunity to participate in that summit?
So last year we had 166. And so we're building it. This year we've got capacity for up to 250.
Oh, wow.
So any of your listeners, so people who are working in STEM government departments, so that might be agriculture, fisheries, environment, any of those grads are also really welcome at things like the summit. And we have had a number attend from DISA, from Science and Innovation and industry, and they've gotten so much out of it because, it really is for anyone who is on that journey. So as they're starting their STEM career, before they get into those other roles. And my dream is that one day we're renting out the convention centre, but I think that'll be a while.
Stick with it. It'll happen. So then in terms of that external communication, well, actually, before we get to that external piece, just circling back to that internal communications and, as you say, using those internal chat channels, What's your advice to people around best practice use of those channels to ensure that they remain effective and they don't become overused and ineffective?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess with our organisation, everyone is so busy that we really haven't had any issues with overuse. In that, it's we've always got more things on our to-do list than we can have. The other thing I will mention is not only Slack, but using a project management tool like we use Monday.com. But that's another way to all work very collaboratively together and make sure, two people aren't working on the same thing, or if you need some information from another person, you can hop into the board and check where it's at. So we find those sort of tools quite effective. I guess the big thing I would, we don't have much trouble with this, but I have heard from other orgs is just reminding people it is still a work communication tool. So whether you're private messaging somebody or you're writing to the team, always just to have that, I always think about, yes, this is a more friendly, fun, quick tone sort of piece of communication toolkit. But, make sure that it, stays really focused and professional. Having said that, we have team members who are not, office-based, and a number of days a week we work remotely. So we also have a mood boosters channel on our Slack, and that's just really lovely for celebrating team wins. So, we might have a donation campaign and we'll celebrate how that's gone. Or, on a Friday, we say, what's our win of the week? It can be personal or professional. I think that's really important to make sure that we're part of one team, that we are actually team members and we care about each other. We find that doesn't get overused. And then we have channels that are very specific for what the task is. So if there's an external relations team channel, and there's a programs team channel. And when we're delivering the program, I've got over 300 people running everywhere in January. We have very specific events within channels as well. So we've got that down to a pretty fine art, and it has been an amazing tool. And I guess, I always like to counteract it, as I said, by saying, the only thing I could ever see going really wrong with it is if people aren't using it properly. But we haven't had that problem.
So moving the focus to your external communication and these various audiences that you have, everyone from the high school student and the teachers who influence them, the parents, and obviously you're widening the aperture a little bit now to sort of capture, the university, graduate, postgraduate sort of community as well, plus partners. Clearly government would have a major interest at a state level and a national level. There's, I'm sure, interest internationally in some of the work that you're doing as well. How do you think about communicating to all of those different audiences, and how do you plan to be effective in terms of your communication?
Sure. Well, look, from the start, we have to go back to the strategic plan, and we're about to redo ours later this year with our board. But that's, for me, the number one thing is looking at why we're doing what we do. When I first started at NYSF, I sort of come in and looked at, we were doing a lot of different things, but what you really have to consider is, does it relate back to the strategy of what we're trying to achieve? Then from there, obviously doing very specific external relations and internal program plans, to make sure that things run very specifically from that more strategic place and operational levels, right down to the, I guess, technical, which channels are we going to use, and then calendars of which content on which days. So, we have a lot of different plans going on, essentially. And another thing is ownership, really. So earlier this year we had just our 12 people team, really looking at who does what, do the tasks fit where we've got them? Are there any of those tasks, we call them the hot potatoes, where everybody thinks it's someone else's, job to do it. So those sort of more management level, get-togethers are very important, because if you haven't got that bit right, then you can't communicate it correctly, and people don't know who's responsible for communicating what. So that's, from that back end side. And then obviously when it comes to the actual audiences, it is all about our audience and where we will find the different audiences. So for anyone looking at our social media, just as an example, you'll see that the NYSF's, like the way that we come across on Instagram, and now we're doing a trial on TikTok, it is very aimed at the, people who are, kind of earlier in their, they might be 18 plus. So it's more about people who are closer to the peer age, or the people who would come to our programs. But we are seeing that change too. We're seeing, like as people grow up with something like Instagram, you are seeing usage that goes into, we have teachers finding out information on Instagram and others. But you'll see that we're a little bit cheekier in our approach, and a little bit more real and fun. So we'll put stuff on there that, or share a meme that we wouldn't necessarily on some of our more serious channels. For Facebook is a really important one for reaching community supporters, such as our Rotarians. They're really active on there, and they share a lot of content or repost things that we do, and that's a really key way of reaching right out into communities. So we see not exactly an older audience, but it isn't quite the ones who are close to the peer age of the students that we're with. There are a few of them on there, but it's less likely to be them. So we're more likely to find schools, teachers, some of, our other, partners and stakeholders are on there. And then the really key one for our partnerships, for our relationship with the STEM sector, is more and more becoming LinkedIn. And so we have a very, a slightly more professional tone on there, but, it's still, we're a youth charity. So if we think it's relevant, we do share some content as well, because I think it humanises us. And, work can get a bit boring if you only focus on the really, really serious stuff.
Continuing to learn and to test with these different channels, I know in some of the work that we've been doing, surprising, for example, with TikTok, we've found that in one particular project that we have quite a number of older people who are engaged on TikTok, and we just never thought that would be the case, but the data told us that was the case, and so therefore that has an impact on the way that we think about publishing through those channels. So how are you thinking about feedback loops, continuous feedback loops to continue to refresh your understanding of those audiences and their preferences around communication, and the form that they want that communication, and the time that they want that communication in the channel that they prefer? Because it's a big job, and when you think of the complexity of the different groups that you're trying to reach across Australia, it's very diverse.
It absolutely is. And look, I've said this before, even when I was running other digital media projects back, in other roles that I've been in. You can never set it and forget it. It's, every day you're learning, and every day those platforms are changing. And, you're very right there. We can make some assumptions about what the audience is, but it can change very rapidly. It's really important to ask the question, and obviously look at the data that's coming out of the platforms. For us, obviously, that evaluation piece that we do with all of our programs, asking people where they heard about us, that's really critical as well. It gives us a lot of intel, and sometimes we try and do a alpha beta test as well. If there's a new approach that we're trying, we might try it in a couple of different ways and see, different platforms, and just sort of check whether we think that it's being effective. So I think it is fun to do some trials, and you often don't always know the answers. But I think the one thing we're very aware of is not necessarily closing off a channel. Even if the audience looks like it's changing a bit, we'll still keep that channel. But we'll make sure that we've got our eye on what the what the up and coming ones are. And our young volunteers are very good at, they're almost like a youth advisory group, because they can tell us what they're on, what they're looking at, what they think of our content, which is also really important. Our whether it's the young people who are only just recently out of some of our school programs, or whether that's, a community member like one of our Rotarians, somewhere in a small country town, they do tell us what they think, and we listen, because you don't always get it right either.
No, indeed. But that's part of the opportunity, part of the challenge. With smaller teams, again, such as yours, AI is an enabling technology, and again, I can call on my own personal experience to see just how effective it can be in terms of improving the impact of the work that communications teams do, all the way through any particular workflow, be it research, pre-production, production, post-production, distribution, evaluation. How have you thought about AI technologies, and how are you using those to increase the impact and the effectiveness of your team?
Sure. Look, one of the things I think that's most lovely about being in a science and technology adjacent charity is that, we are lucky that some of the experts in all of these areas are good friends of NYSF or even alumni of ours. So we do have, we listen a lot. We kind of see that this area is changing very rapidly. Even the National Youth STEM Summit that I was talking about, the sort of presentations we had on use of AI when it first started, and now we're in our fourth year later this year, they're completely different. The platforms are different, the opportunities and the cautions that we all need to apply. So one of the things we just have to be really, really vigilant of is some of the information we have is very, very confidential, and we've got very strict child safety. And, when we're looking after people for 9 days, we need to know things like medical conditions or support needs and things like that as well. So there are parts of our business that are absolutely, we would not ever, tangle with AI in those very specific, very sensitive sort of areas. But there's other areas where we've found it's really speeding up some work for us. So, as long as it's not something confidential and it doesn't, in any way betray people's details, it just can be great to speed up, the work that a tiny team like ours, if you have to do it all manually. But I think the biggest thing that we all comment on and say is you can't just 100% rely on AI for it, and you also have to do some manual checks, especially if, for example, you're asking it to pull together some data or some information for you. You always have to check that it is correct. It's better at some things than others. And obviously the ethical side of it, I won't go into too much detail on that, but there are some platforms where, you're going to have more reliable research data than others. So it's an exciting space. We certainly see young people also using it to apply for our programs. And that's fine. You can tell immediately if they've used it and not checked it. And you can also tell if they've used
lots of dashes.
Yeah. And so that to help them communicate, because we have people at all different abilities, and so if it helps somebody get across what they're trying to say, I think that's fantastic. So yeah, we're slowly adopting it, but with caution, I guess.
Okay.
Say,
would you have embedded it into most parts of your workflow, or are you still slowly coming to bringing it right into the fold as such, and testing before you adopt?
Yeah. Really, we're pretty only using it when it comes to things that are external or, nothing at all to do with that kind of confidentiality side of the business. It would have to, a lot more checks and balances before any of us would be comfortable to go anywhere near that. And it would need also, I think, board approval and a big discussion. But from that external side, I'd say we're not fully rolled out yet, because, again, we've always just been slightly cautious on some of these things can work really well. And if it does, great, let's use it. But sometimes it gets things wrong. So we're kind of at that I'd say we've been early adopters, but just with caution to make sure that it is actually delivering what we need. It's totally integrated for the young people who are applying for our program, so they're all using it. So, and so that's great. We're fine with that. Still, at the end of the day, we've got rubrics and a national selection committee that make it very clear what we're looking for. So whether it's AI that they've used to get their information through to us or not, we ask enough questions that you get a good feel for who the young person is.
Yeah, they can't make up their history.
No. Yeah.
So in terms of conversations with like organisations and, your partners, the learned academies, industry associations, professional membership organisations, all the other people who you're sort of generally having conversations with, what's the general vibe around AI? Are you finding that everyone's a bit like you, particularly the ones, reputation is everything, in many of those organisations, and therefore it needs to be managed carefully. But what's right now? Where do you see sort of that general AI adoption conversation being in your sector?
Yeah, look, I think different organisations have a very different response to it, and the sort of safeguarding that they need to have depending on where they're at. The other thing is that ethical point of view about the energy, energy and sustainability side. If should you just use AI because you can, or is it something that you're actually adding to? So I think that comes into not just us, but all of the other organisations, making sure that we're using it responsibly, not just from the data protection side of things, but also from the energy efficiency. And, people still have amazing talents. So I think I never want to lose individual voices. I know AI can learn a lot, but I think, you can still have your own voice. And if it's pure AI, you'll lose that inner voice that's there. Other organisations really seem so far to be using it a little bit like us, a little bit of caution, but starting to use it for things where they feel like it's, not going to cause any issues and they really need to speed up a process. So I think, for our sort of organisation, it will slowly become part of certain tasks, but others I can't see us ever integrating, an external machine, not for a long time yet because of that data safety.
So where to from here? Obviously, you've been in the job now for 6 years. It sounds like you're still energised by the challenge and certainly the importance of STEM, and I'm sure, encouraging young girls into STEM is clearly a priority, and I'm sure that that's something that you're working very hard on. But where do you 3 to 5 years?
Yeah. Well, look, definitely I do feel like the 6 years has gone quicker than it might have in some other organisations because of the challenges that we had in my first 6 years in the role. We had the terrible 2019, 2020 bushfires and our first evacuations and cancellations, and having to make sure that, we were delivering what was required for all of those students, but also all the other, STEM sector partners that we have. And then we pretty much went headlong into COVID, which, sort of really changed what we had to deliver for a few years. So really, I feel like I've just got to the nuts and bolts of the last couple of years of what we do and actually expanding it and finding the right partners and things for those particular areas. So I think there's still a lot of exciting things for us to do. I think one of the biggest challenges is always, is fundraising and having the funding both as an organisation to actually be able to run these things. It's getting increasingly sustainability funding is critical because, for example, I mentioned we have over 300 volunteers. Every single one of them has to have a police check. They have to have a working with vulnerable people check. They have to have training, and they have to have CPR and first aid.
Wow.
And that's just some of, we also have legal agreements, we have insurance. So we have a lot of hidden costs there just to literally run the program. And it's a responsibility I take really seriously, and I've enjoyed over the last 6 years, really have become quite an expert in child protection and safety for out of school sort of experiences. But, that's one of the things that, often I can attract some funding for things like, if it goes directly into a scholarship for a student, or it's directly into the thing that we're doing, I guess the bright, shiny thing. But the big problem, and it's not just NYSF, I'm seeing it across the sector, it's really tough to get that sustainability funding and that partnership funding. And if we don't get that, we have to put the fees up. So we have to actually try and pass that cost on to the young people. And then if we do that, we're not sitting with the strategic mission that is to make sure we have the most diverse and people in STEM, and we're being as equitable as possible. There are heaps of people out there who want to get into a science and technology career, but most of them that haven't already started going in that pathway are from some sort of underrepresented background. That might be regional remote, that might be young women, as you said, and we actually do really well with that. We have over 60% young women year on year, and I think
wow, that's great.
Yeah. And we have around...
Is that a result of anything that you've done in particular, or is it just where society is moving and young women are moving in terms of their attitude towards STEM?
I think it's because of our approach. Our approach is a very inclusive. It's not being academic or being really, really smart. It's only a part of, we need to know that somebody's not going to struggle, but it's not you must be the top elite STEM student in X. That's not our approach at all. And we have this very friendly, youth-led kind of approach. So I think all feelings of imposter syndrome, go away. And having been a young woman in STEM myself, I wouldn't have really felt confident enough in year 11 to go for something if I hadn't known it's friendly and fun and, a real chance just to have a great experience above all. So I think that's our magic with things like young women in STEM. Regional remote, absolute critical that we have equity and access funding to help them get there, both in terms of paying the fees and also, coming to the program. And then and that's because we don't have that core funding to mean I can just charge a small fee. So, but a lot of them can't afford, to really have to contribute, or they won't come. And so we do a lot of work ourselves, and we have a lot of, so our founding partner, Rotary, often a Rotary club will connect with somebody and sponsor them. That's with them and the student and their family. But, basically I feel like we could do a lot more of this. We could reach a lot more young people. We could probably deliver another 300 or 400 at least from the demand I can see. It's just that they can't necessarily afford to get there. And we can't afford to run X many more programs. So I hate to bring things back to money, but funding's probably my biggest challenge, and it's sort of what I really want to work on. But there's some really promising signs out there. I think philanthropy is something that, we're 42 years along now. So it's really the time, we've started looking at that and starting to lean into, how could we help fund people who most need it to get to our programs in a slightly different way. And having said that, we've got a lot of amazing funding partners and donors already. If it wasn't for them, we couldn't run. That's my challenge, and it's an exciting one. I kind of like it because I, get to see the result when somebody says, we've had a homeless person come to NYSF, and to see the difference that has when you can set up the funding support and give that person a seat at the table. The regional more remote ones. The other thing I'm really proud of is we've built over the last 3 years, we've had over 3% Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, and we nearly bumped 4% last year. And that's for a science and tech program, and it's even more engaging for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders. For our National Youth STEM Summit, we had 16% come to that last year of that 166. So, that says a lot to me about cultural safety and that we've got it right in terms of what we're delivering. It's just that we have to find ways to financially support people, especially in cost of living crisis. That's my big worry is how do people do an extra thing like a STEM experience when they can't afford to put food on the table.
Yeah. So before we go, just sort of wrapping it all up and providing some advice and guidance to the vast bulk of our audience who are communicators working inside government, not specifically about science, but about anything. As you look at what's happening, changing environment, changing landscape, changing opportunities, changing habits in the way people consume and gather information, the way they share that information, what are maybe 2 or 3 things that you people should be thinking about to be more effective?
Yeah, I guess probably one of the key things I think is not limiting, so when we are communicating or sharing information, one of the things we find is people will hear something like STEM or science and technology and think that, oh, well, I'm this department or I'm that department or my job is purely external marketing and comms. But it really is the community of people who share that information that helps either organisations like ours or others to actually share what opportunity is out there. So I think that's one thing, is being curious and being prepared to share things that will help others gain experiences. I think my other advice would just be keep doing trials, keep testing, obviously within safe parameters for whatever your organisation is. We obviously deal with a lot of people under 18, so there's things we can't do, but always, do some tests, do some trials, and lean into people with new ideas. One of the things that excites me the most, I'm getting on a bit. And so whilst I, have had an extraordinary career in comms and more in science comms and also digital media, I don't know what the latest cool thing is. So it's leaning into those younger people, and not always younger. Some people just are more passionate about, I've got friends who read extra blogs and sit up on Twitch all night and things like that. I love listening to what they recommend or where they think we can meet somebody and spread the word. So even if it's not you that's got the expertise, be prepared to have a go and try something different, because some of our best campaigns for NYSF have come, from the brainchild of, an alum or someone who has tried a whole new approach and I wouldn't have thought of it. So
yeah. Fantastic. Well, Melanie Bagg, the CEO of the National Youth Science Forum, let's not leave it 6 years again to get back to having another conversation. Congratulations on all of your success and enduring what would have been, I'm sure, enormously difficult and challenging times through COVID to organise and restructure and plan and replan. I can just see plans being torn up and thrown in the bin as they were being assembled, and best of luck as you continue on this mission to, deliver these transformative experiences for young Australians, to encourage them to continue their interest and participation in a career in STEM. So thanks for everything that you're doing for the site, and thanks very much for joining us on GovComms.
Thank you.
And to you, the audience, thank you once again. What a great conversation to someone who's really achieving a great deal with the National Youth Science Forum. And I'd encourage you to go and have a look at their comms. They communicate very well. They have a personality, they have an identity, they have a tone. And as Melanie suggested, they sort of switch it up around things. But yeah, you get a sense of who they are, which is obviously the challenge of and again, Melanie's insight that really it's the human piece, and being more human at this point in time is really, a real strength, and really explaining and being empathetic and understanding the audience and being able to bring them and draw them into the impact of what it is that you're doing, or using those empathetic skills that you have, to tell a better story over time on multiple platforms. And indeed, that insight from Melanie that, ultimately bringing people together in real life is where the magic happens. And I think that's increasingly what we're seeing, even at the moment through the FIFA World Cup. I think that's one of the great learnings that we're seeing at the moment, is that people like to be together in community. And I think that's something that we need to keep an eye on and start thinking about how is it that we can bring into that, as we know that, technologies such as artificial intelligence are going to continue to play an increasingly bigger role in the work that we do. But anyway, a big thanks to Melanie today, and a big thanks to you for coming back once again. A rating or a review on your favourite podcast app always helps us to be found. We do have many of those, and very grateful for those of you who have taken the time to do that. But if you could do that, that would be gratefully accepted. You can stay up to date on social media with all of the latest from GovComms and the GovComms Institute. But until the next time that we do catch up, please, people, be kind to each other. My name is David Pembroke, and it's bye for now.